Okay, let's we'll go ahead and get started. If people trickle in, we can have them join the fun as they come. So thank you for sticking it out for the very last session. I promise you don't have to think any more in 1 hour, and we'll try to keep it tight in 50 minutes. So we're going to be joined today by Dr. Sue Hovorka of the University of Texas, Austin, Jen Hedaya of Air Alliance Houston, Jane Stricker from the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, and I've got to see it because the sign thing did it right. I don't want to get it wrong. And Dan Cohan, I've said it 3 times, but Dan Cohan of Rice University. I think maybe all our brains are done. I'm going to let them give a longer, more proper introduction in a few minutes. But the first thing that we'd like to do is a little activity. And so my colleague Emily is passing out cards. And then for anybody who needs a pen. If you get one of these pens and it's not writing, check. There might be a little red tip on the end that's making it not work. So you just pull that off and it'll work. And what we're going to be doing is this session is examining. Oh, do you guys have more? I fell down on the job. Does everybody have a card? Yes, and a pen? Okay. So what this session is going to be about is having a discussion about what the risks of carbon management could be and what the benefits of carbon management could be. And I suspect that all of us have some ideas about that, and all of us have some questions about that. And so what we want to do is basically crowdsource those things. So you guys each have a card in front of you, and what I would like you to do is write 3 things on the card. The first thing I'd like you to write is what you think there might be a benefit of carbon management or carbon dioxide removal or carbon capture and storage, all the fun words we've been using. One benefit from these techniques. And then the next thing I would like you to write is what you see as a risk or a cost of these techniques. And then the last thing I would like you to write is something that you would like to know more about. What should we talk about while we're in here that would help you get a better sense of the risks and the benefits of carbon management? And I'm going to tell you now, you will have a few minutes to keep writing this, but once you do, what we're going to do is we're going to pass these cards around so everybody else in the room gets to read what you wrote. So that way you'll all know what you're all excited about and what you're all worried about, and then we'll be ready to talk about it, all right? So go ahead and write your comments, and then I will give you instructions for how we play the passing game, which is confusing at first and easy eventually. Sorry, the third question is what you want to know. So what do you think is a benefit? What do you think is a cost? And then what would you like to know more about? What are you unsure of in terms of costs or benefits that we should talk about? Okay, and so what I want you guys to do is take a look at what other people are thinking. So just see what other people's thoughts are, and what I'd like you to do is if that is something that resonates with you, if you're like, oh yeah, that's a benefit too, or oh God, I didn't think about it, but I agree, that is a risk, put a little tick mark next to that. So all 3 of them, if that's something that resonates, add just a little check next to it, and we're gonna pass it around so we can see where we have things in common. And we're essentially, once we're done with this, once we get them all passed around, I and my colleague are gonna step out while our speakers introduce themselves, and we're gonna collate these into the questions that we're going to discuss in this session, okay? And so I will then deliver them to Sue, our moderator, who will be in charge.
It's the only joke I know. I probably read it in a Laffy Taffy. Y'all remember those?
All right, so we're going to introduce you. We're your panelists who are here to talk to you, to answer questions insofar as we can, and also solicit answers insofar as we can from you. And so we're going to introduce ourselves and tell us what you might want to know or not know about us. I am really getting afternoonish about this. I'm Sue Hovorka. I'm a researcher at University of Texas at Austin. I'm having a good time being here in Houston, except for the traffic. I've been working on carbon storage since 1998 before we knew what to call it. I got into it. People say, everyone says, were you in oil and gas? And I said, no, I was in groundwater, and I got to worrying about in the Ogallala Aquifer and the Edwards Aquifer, and I got to worrying about some of the past climate impacts that you can see in the geologic history, and thinking about, oh my God, what happens? What if this climate change that they're rumoring happens and it comes out like this, which is likely? It was really, really quite drastic situations that I was seeing it myself in the geologic record, not from book learning, but from seeing things that had happened, how much the playas had shrunk away to nothing in the high plains. It was really dry, and the climate, climate swings kind of drastic, and flooded, kind of drastic. So I got in CCS. I worked on field tests. So I've been out doing with a big team of researchers from many institutions, US-wide and internationally, doing tests. So I can report from the hands-on the field about what it's like when you do CCS project. I've done it, so.
I'm Jane Stricker. I run the Houston Energy Transition Initiative at the Greater Houston Partnership, which is an economic development organization, nonprofit business community. I bring together a coalition of industry, business, city, county government, trade associations, a broad range of community organizations and others to think about how do we ensure the long-term economic prosperity of the Houston region as we transition to a low-carbon, energy-abundant future. Prior to that, I spent 20 years working for BP in a broad range of roles. I'm not a technical expert, but I did in 2018 and 19 work on the National Petroleum Council study on carbon capture, use, and storage on behalf of the Department of Energy. So BP chaired that study, and I was the primary project manager bringing it together. Before taking on that role, I knew nothing about carbon management. And so having the opportunity to work with academics and researchers and industry and government and lots of really, really smart people, I learned a lot about carbon management, and it's something that I think is absolutely essential in terms of meeting both our climate and energy goals for the future, as is a broad range of other solutions for the energy transition. So I'm not saying I think it's more important than other things. I'm saying I think it is one of the essential tools in the toolkit. Yeah. So I grew up in Baltimore, and on the east side of Baltimore, and so it's a lot like the east side of Houston. So I grew up in an industrial part of town. My grandfather worked in the Bethlehem Steel, and the steel mill died from asbestos. And both my mother and my aunt had suffered from lung cancer as a result of environmental. And so for me, recognizing that, these industries do create health impacts, and that we all have to find ways to work together to solve that challenge while we're also solving the other big challenges of the world, it's an important thing to me. So thank you.
I think our history informs so much of what we bring to the table and what our perspectives are, and I was really interested in that story, so I'm glad you shared. For folks who didn't hear my story last night, my name is Jen Hedaya. I am a Houstonian. I was born and raised in an EJ community here in Houston, Harris County. I live in an EJ community in Houston today. I'm the executive director of Air Alliance Houston. We are a nonprofit advocacy organization solely dedicated to reducing the public health impacts from air pollution. We've been doing it since the late 1980s. We were formed in response to the issue of smog in Houston. Spoiler alert, we are still working on smog in Houston, but along with a range of other issues and concerns. In full disclosure, I think what Ugbad Kosar said today is critically important. It's important for you to know my frame and what my convictions are around this topic today. And I will tell you, truthfully, I am a skeptic. And what I say I'm skeptical about is not carbon management writ large. I think very often, and in settings like this, we equate the word carbon management, we say it, but what we really mean is CCS and DAC, and they're not necessarily one and the same. So I'm not a skeptic of carbon management. We have to manage carbon. But I'm a skeptic of the lean in and rush in and funding towards CCS and DAC as what feels to me as a community-based organization and a person living in an EJ community as the preferred solution. So I'm skeptical when something like that is presented to community as get on board, it's coming no matter what. That makes me skeptical. I think we would all feel skeptical about that. Number two, I'm skeptical because community isn't aware of what this technology is, and we are rushing forward, going fast, bringing things to communities that have already been historically overburdened by pollution and disaster and have distrust with industry, and they aren't aware enough of the technology, which is very complicated. I think one thing I learned from yesterday, I turned to one of my colleagues and said, this is really complicated. And we think about this all day, every day. And here we are asking community to get on board with something that is incredibly complicated. And until they know what questions to ask, I'm skeptical of that intense rush forward. So those are the reasons I'm skeptical. And we've had some great conversation here today. We're really excited to hear what your questions are, your skepticisms possibly or not. And really looking forward to those questions. It's been a great dialogue so far.
So I'm Dan Cohan, grew up in Texas as well, and the framing that I'm coming at this from is as an atmospheric scientist. I've been studying atmospheric chemistry since my undergrad years and came at it from the air pollution modeling arena since my time at Georgia Tech for graduate school and worked and seeing what it takes to control air pollution, worked for the state of Georgia's environmental agency, their TCEQ equivalent, and really my first 10 years or so at Rice focused my research on what we do about air pollution, and the more recent 7 years or so has been more at the interface between air quality, climate change, and energy. And so look at it as a systems perspective and see carbon capture as one of many tools that's going to be needed to mitigate emissions to the extent we need to be able to achieve our climate goals, but being sure that we do it in a framework that also addresses our air quality challenges, also protects water, also protects ecosystems. So looking at a systems perspective, was able to lay out some of those ideas in my book. The first book that I published came out last year, Confronting Climate Gridlock, and devoted one of the chapters of that book to carbon capture and carbon removal technologies, but intentionally put it after all the other technologies that are needed to clean up energy through efficiency, through cleaning up electricity, through using that clean electricity for electrification and to make clean fuels for what we can't electrify. So seeing it as one piece of what's needed, but making sure that we don't make it get in the way of the other parts of the solution as well.
Which we enjoy very much. Actually, let's let you, since the first question says, how can the benefits be passed on to communities? And it might be useful to you if we get off our chairs and let you see the benefits. So let's step aside, panel, and let you see the benefits, and ourselves and the panel, please read it, and then we'll talk about how benefits can be passed to communities. Would anybody like to? Dan, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is part of what makes it a challenge to have communities benefit from this, is that most of what we're seeing here is that the benefits are global, is that we're taking out the trash, being the landfill for a CO2 whose effect isn't, the CO2 itself isn't really affecting our local or community air quality. The reason we need to take it out of the air is making a contribution to the global need to bring down the global pool of CO2. And so there's always that what we call a free rider problem in economics, where you have, why would we want to be the ones that are doing the carbon capture here when it's the rest of the world benefiting from that bit of CO2 taken out to address the climate crisis, reduce climate change impacts, and many of the others as well. And when saying this would be, I guess, high quality of life, I'm not sure what, if that's the jobs or the economic opportunities that come from that, but many of the other benefits are really doing our part in the global problem.
Well, I don't disagree. I would add that Houston in particular has faced 7 federally declared disasters over the last 5 years or so. And so it is, climate change is very real in our communities. And so while there is a global benefit and while everyone needs to do their part, I think as a region of the country, this is one of the regions of the country that has been hit as hard as anyone with climate issues. So I think, reducing the risk of those sorts of climate issues and mitigating, in addition to building out resiliency, I think is important for the community.
Could I ask a question in response to the list? I saw this on the card and I circled it and went, I want to understand this term that somebody used, and it's the one that Emily is writing right now, which is hydrocarbon imperialism. Now, I have a phrase I like to use that I call carbon essentialism, and I'm wondering if someone wants to share, if that was your card, if you could define that term for me. I've never heard that, but I talk a lot about carbon essentialism, and maybe they're the same thing. Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you. You are telling us, you are revealing the anonymity of the card, so I thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. And I apologize because I didn't know that we were going to be passing those cards, and so I would have made it something that was less like jumbled in jargon. But I have my bias. I am a managing policy advisor of tech policy at Carbon 180, and so I am focused primarily on DAC projects. My interest in direct air capture came from the fact that I think that it could be an opportunity for the United States to bear the burden of cleaning up the public waste that we've used to develop our nation economically and otherwise. So as we are engaging in climate discussions, there's heavy emphasis on developing nations to cut back their usage of hydrocarbons, but they're not the ones who led to this. And is that?
Yes, now I totally understand. Thank you so much for that. That came up a little bit in one of our earlier sessions, which is the global and ethical obligation of industrialized nations to reduce carbon, especially when less industrialized nations are bearing the greater burden of it. So I'll define my own term and my own question, which is something we talked about before. And it is reflected a little bit in the biggest benefit under stop and reversing carbon emission. One of the concerns that we've had as an advocacy group is the focus on carbon and what I call carbon essentialism. And we talked a little bit about it in an earlier session, and it's come up, and I have to give credit where credit is due. So this is one of the first spaces like this, where the co-pollutants of carbon have been really dug into in a way that I haven't heard at some of these sessions before, so I'm thankful for that. That has been a concern for environmental justice communities, that a focus on carbon only forgets the real detriments of other hazardous air pollutants that are being emitted today. And if you pull carbon out of the air and you're not also reducing those hazardous air pollutants at point source, then people are still living with the health effects of those pollutants, even if we do reach our climate goals. And I think it's something we need to keep in mind when we talk about issues related to community engagement. I saw on some of the cards, why are communities concerned? Why am I skeptical? Well, that's one of the reasons that communities are concerned and why I'm skeptical, because it feels as though the focus on carbon capture, it's in the name, direct air well, carbon's not in that one, apologies. Carbon capture, carbon management, it's in the name over and over and over again, ignores their lived reality of breathing in fine particulates. It ignores the lived reality of our record number of ozone action days here in Houston. And I think that is one of the reasons why community members are concerned and why we're skeptical. Thank you for answering my question with a question.
I've been waiting for some time till the air quality people and the CO2 capture people spoke to each other. So it has.
And what I'm waiting for is for the transportation people to talk to the carbon management people. I could talk all day about that, y'all, but that's not our session.
Okay,
I actually heard a rumor that that's happening, that there's a relationship between DOT, Department of Transportation, and the Department of Energy. They're starting
federal
to work,
level?
At the federal level, they're starting to work together on this.
We're in Texas. Well, I mean, in major cities like Houston, half of our carbon emissions are coming out of tailpipes. And until we start talking about This is the last thing on my soapbox, I promise, Susan. Until we start talking about transportation policy in Texas and the fact that we are just building highways after highways after highways, we will never get to carbon goals. Even if we do all of these things, we're never going to get there.
Oh yeah, I wish there was a train home to Austin. I really do. What's the second question? What's the capacity of this industry or technology to deliver on the agreed upon priorities? You want to, Jane? The capacity.
So is the question the capacity of the industry or the technology? So I think there's a lot of ways to answer that question, I would say. And so the capacity in terms of being able to store carbon, I wouldn't say is limitless, but I think.
I say it's vast.
Yeah.
Not limitless, but vast.
Right, I think that's a fair assessment.
Larger than you're thinking. So.
Yeah, like hundreds of years of capacity to store carbon dioxide. And so I think from that standpoint, the capacity is vast. I think that the technology that exists today is well developed in several areas, in certain environments and in certain types of capture technology. It's been in use for as much as 50 years. But in other industrial settings, it may not be as advanced, and things like direct air capture are, the technologies have not been as developed for as long. And so I think there's a lot of capacity to continue to develop technologies that will evolve and give us more opportunities and more options for how we remove carbon from the air. I'm not sure what other measures on capacity.
I think it might be important to go back to the first concept about carbon management, which is a paper from MIT talking about the need to have multiple technologies working together. Sometimes people conceptualize this as a competition. No, I'd just rather do efficiency. No, I'd rather just do solar and batteries. So everybody who's ever looked at this seriously, and I invited you to do it from your own personal perspective, from your house, how you find that the best way is some combo of the technologies, using not just one, but often the number mentioned is seven like dwarves, 7 magic technology. No, a portfolio of technologies that work together. So if you think this through about how you would get to where you go, find food, get energy, how you would have all that carbon abated, what would you use? You end up coming up with a need to have it's not the capacity of this technology in CCS or CCS and DAC. It's the capacity of all the technologies together is important to keep in mind. There is no one saying CCS only anywhere, as I know of. Let me know if we'll punch them if we find them.
I think it's a industry that still needs to prove what its capacity is. I've been teaching my energy and environment course at Rice for 16 years now. And I don't know exactly how far back close to the beginning I've been showing slides to the class from whatever is the carbon capture or something annual report about what projects are out there. And it's always been this big upward curve in terms of projects that are planned and about to be on the horizon. And most of those don't actually get built. And if you actually look at how fast carbon capture has grown, it has not been on an exponential curve. It has not been on anywhere near the growth curve that it needs to be. We see out of the climate models or the IPCC or others who look at it from a global or systems perspective say that we need this in the 5 to 20 billion ton a year scale. And you see an industry that's just sort of slowly been creeping up, projects that are on the million ton scale. I think we've never seen this level of incentives and subsidies for it before. And so with 45Q tax credit, with the various bills that passed Congress in 2021, this is really going to be a proving time of, does this, with all this incentive, with all this momentum behind it, does this actually scale up, or does it look more like the U.S. nuclear industry, which has had lots of promise and lots of hype for an industry that hasn't built a new plant since I was a toddler. So I think really needs to be proven. I absolutely agree. There's plenty of storage. There's plenty of space to store the carbon, but actually the capture, it's a kind of a show me state right now.
I'd also just add one last point to that is that in order to get the first, I mean, there's 41 active projects around the world today doing CCS, but in order to get the first well, Class 6 well drilled in the United States, it took 6.5 years working with the EPA to get that permit done. So a lot of the, irregardless of the economic side of it and the capacity, the ability to actually get a permit to get something done, there are 91 permits, with the EPA today. And so a lot of that has been driven just by not a lack of desire to get projects built, but a lack of ability to get things permitted because it is a relatively new industry. And, these agencies need to feel really, really confident that they know exactly how this is going to work out, and relies heavily on the research that organizations like Sue's do to sort of provide that assurance that if they do issue that permit, it's going to do what it's supposed to do.
I might add something to Dan's comment, which is my group works globally. We go to the Council of Parties on climate change and so forth to provide information. So we have our ears out getting talked to, and we're seeing a big upswing. What you see in Houston is pretty intense, but it's not unique. The Australians are very much after it. They're seeing necessity to do with their trading partners to provide opportunity to reduce carbon in order to maintain their trade, which Australia is very dependent on trade. We see a very strong UK move that they're very proud of a number of projects that have been deeply invested in the government. Their strategies are different than here, but the movement speed is really similar, picking up globally. All right, so let's go on to the third question. How do we ease the fears or misconceptions of the general public?
All right. I get this question a lot, and you can insert into the space. How do you ease the distrust of the general public about X, whatever that X might be, whether it's about a permit, whether it's about petrochemicals, whether it's about TCEQ, whether it's about CCS? And my answer is always the same. And I hope I'm not oversimplifying. I think the first step has to be telling the truth. And what I mean about telling the truth is truth from industry. It's not about the research, it's not about the developers, because ultimately the researchers are not where this technology is going to be. It's not going to be at Rice, not what we're talking about in community. It's going to be on the stacks, at a refinery, at a power plant that has been historically a bad actor in a community. And so number one to me is those facilities, there's an accountability expectation from those industries. And I'm not naming names, but we have some of the world's largest polluters and greenhouse gas emitters right here in Houston, Harris County. There has to be a commitment to telling the truth to the community about your operation, about the emissions, about what you are doing or not doing. This morning, Ugbad Kosar from Carbon 180 talked about the different kinds of environmental justice, and one of them was, and I hope I'm getting it right, was reparative justice. And that's step one. You have to acknowledge the harm that has been done. And until that harm is acknowledged, it is going to be very hard for community to trust you. And I don't mean the researchers, I mean we're talking about this in the field, when this is deployed. And those locations, at least right now in Houston, Harris, are in environmental justice communities. We saw it on the map. Deer Park, EJ community. Baytown, EJ community. Fort Bend, EJ community. And until that trust is created, it's going to be very hard for community members to be open to a different story. I talked about this last night in my opening comments. You have to accept that another story can be true, but if you don't have trust, it's impossible to do that. That's really first and foremost. Second, there has to be an assurance, and this is on a different level of accountability. So my first answer is industry accountability. The second is regulatory accountability. There has to be rigorous regulatory oversight of current facilities and what they're emitting, and new technology brought to facilities and what those risks and benefits are. I believe that we can get to number one. I believe that industry can have honest engagement with community. I'm less hopeful that we will have rigorous regulatory oversight in Texas. And I think that's going to require some significant transformation in the priorities at the highest level, which is the TCEQ. For those who follow the legislative session, we just went through a sunset review with TCEQ. It's a every 12-year administrative review of an agency's efficacy and effectiveness. And by their own internal evaluation, TCEQ was called a, quote, reluctant regulator. Until that changes, I'm not as hopeful that number two will happen. But I think number two is required in order for community to trust that industry is doing right by them, and when they're not, to trust those that are in a position with an obligation to the public to ensure the public's health over the benefit of economic development.
So I have two comments to follow up as moderator. One of them is ask you, Jen, if you would, if it's overstatement of your goals to say we're not to work on carbon emissions until we get criteria and pollutants under control. Would you say that's an essential thing, first thing, criteria and pollutions? Then you're willing to talk about carbon, then and only then we can talk about carbon.
It might surprise you that my answer is no, we need to do all of the above, but we can't talk about carbon without talking about HAPs. And without talking about criteria air pollutants. We can't talk about carbon without talking about the others. I would not suggest that we only talk about criteria air pollutants and not carbon. We have to talk about all of them.
Together in one package.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having this opportunity. I'm coming from Louisiana. I work for Total Energies. I'm on the petrochemical industry. And I'm an analyzer specialist. And in the whole day, I was waiting for somebody to talk about air pollution. Thank you, Jan. Yeah, because and with all the respect, because this is the main thing why I came from Louisiana today. Because yes, we've been talking, I'm sorry. I've been hearing, about, how to capture, how to storage, how to transportate, the carbon dioxide. And that's right, but the main thing is about how can we start the reduction of the carbon dioxide. And that's part of my job task. I really, I think you're gonna add something also, Dan, because whatever hear you saying that you have in your book about, the carbon capture. And this is related also about, on the industry that I work on, the different kind of equipments that we have, and also Total investing on trying to move into the green energy on the best way possible. But also we know that we're limited because we cannot run our superheaters with just solar power or wind power, but we have to create some kind of way that we run the heaters with better efficiency. That means say that adding better analyzers, for control air pollution. The SCR, selective catalytic reduction equipment, with ammonia, with some of the boilers. And I know, just based on the technical wise, with a proper mixture of fuel and oxygen, you're going to have a really good efficiency to run your heaters. Now let's talk about what the people needs to know about. Let's just put it as simple. A vehicle. Right here in Houston is huge. I saw the map, and how much is the red spot. And we go simple in this. I was just giving an explanation for good fellow that he asked me how that works. It's very simple. You ever have a gas stove, if you don't have a proper combustion, you're going to start burning, and you're not going to have a good combustion. It's the same thing with a vehicle. If you start doing your PMs, you change your air filter, or even so, you spend the extra 20 more cents to at least get the mid-grade gasoline, you're going to have a better combustion. All those things, they're going to be add on, and that's going to help. So even so that I'm trying to do on my side, and also with my co-workers, with the team that we have to improve a better combustion on the heaters. we're limited because we still gotta use fuel. We still gotta use natural gas. Okay, so maybe right there is where I can get you help. Also, probably for Jen, every single one of y'all, about how can I get more capture for the carbon dioxide, especially for superheaters or heaters. And that's my question, and that's my thank you, because this has been really good on every single thing that I've been learning. But thank you so much, Jen, because I was waiting for that, for
So
air pollution.
tell us what a superheater does at your facility.
Yeah, superheater. The total energies. There's a different. It's a refinery and petrochemical. I work on the styrene process industry. So styrene is the main product to make plastics, and so
Styrene.
Styrene, yes,
Styrene, like white packing material. Right?
yes. This particular lid, is made with polystyrene too. Probably a little bit of corn. Because it's 30. Whenever they say bio, that is safe. It's not that this is gonna be. It's 30% probably of corn right there,
Right.
but it's good. Something is something. So these superheaters, man, and the boilers. When I say boilers, is a water heater like the one that you have in your house, and is this thing about if you have a water heater in your house and you don't have a good tip, you're not going to have a good combustion, and you're going to start burning more gas. It's the same thing that it happens so easy whenever you go outside to water in your plants. If you can just spray a little bit of water on your condenser outside for your AC, you're going to see all the dirt is going to come out, but the next electrical bill, is going to be probably $20 less.
So you just answered another question of how can we create solutions that, what initiatives can reduce carbon emissions in the first place? So we had one that the writer was not intending.
Well, and that's one of those things. But the main thing I really like about what you were saying. I hope I can have a book, But I really thank you. Okay, and thank you so much for your help.
So we're gonna go into another question.
I just want to flag that we are gonna call it a day for you guys at 3:30 because that was our plan. So was there one other question from the audience? Were you about to raise your hand? Okay, would you mind being our closer? Okay, we'll let you close. Then I'm gonna actually truly let you close. I'm gonna give a little announcement right now. We do have closing remarks down in the auditorium. If you have the strength and energy left and would like to go down and listen, we absolutely encourage it. But guess what? We all understand if everybody is done now. So thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you guys for being here. I'm gonna let you close it out, and then have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you. And Jen, you spoke on something earlier that I think is critically important, which is our consumption of carbon. And we see that in the construction of highways, the development of infrastructure projects, but it's not something that's necessarily touched on as easily because I think it's sticky. The last thing you want to do is resort to blaming individuals for the carbon crisis that we're dealing with. At the same time, we are going to need to see a major pivot in consumer behavior in order to actually achieve climate objectives. So for those individuals sitting up here, what do we do with this? Because this is Houston. I shouldn't have to drive for an hour to get to an airport, but that's the easiest way to get there. And I think that when we're having these discussions, it really is a cumulative process where we are having to ask questions in every component of our lives as to whether or not we are truly, even though it is not an individual issue, holding ourselves accountable to the ethos of the dilemma that we're in. So if you all would speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, the one thing I didn't share in my background is before I worked for a nonprofit organization, well, it is still this. My background is public health. I worked in traditional public health for health departments. I worked in nonprofit organizations before that had a public health mission. And in public health, foundationally, one of the models that we use, and it goes by a variety of names, but we call it the socio-ecological model, which says that no public health problem, well, let me back up. Every public health problem is caused by, and no public health problem will be solved unless you address it at every level of the socio-ecological model, which is individual, family, community, societal, and policy. Pretty simple. It probably goes by a number of different names. I learned a new one at a conference. It's the exposome. Did I say it right? Exposome. I said it wrong. The exposome, which acknowledges that no problem is created at any one level, and you can only solve at multiple levels, and it acknowledges that environmental, that ecological, bi-direct, triple, quadruple directionality. So, and I think Sue actually referenced this, you know, the 7 things you have to do to make change. That model suggests that there is individual level change, but without all the other levels, we will not see that universal change. Or if we only do policy, although policy can influence the individual more, but I can still speed, right? I can still not wear my seatbelt. So unless you have all of those levels working together, you won't see that change. So I think in a very wonky public health theoretical answer, that's my answer to your question. And as an organization that tries to work at all of those levels, we agree. It is not solely the responsibility of individual to make change, although that is what some of the, at least here in Texas, some of the messaging around, for example, ozone reduction will be to us, which is, you know, ride your bike today. Well, if I rode my bike every day, I am still not going to get us out of ozone non-attainment. So we can't limit to that message, but we have to be, I think, nested in all of those messages and work on all of those levels, which we try to do as a nonprofit organization, which is why we collect data, which is why we have citizen science, which is why we change the narrative, which is why we also do policy advocacy on all levels.
I think I intentionally made the carbon capture chapter the last and least of the technology chapters of my book, because we can only come close to capturing what we need to capture if we've done more than ever before on efficiency, on making it possible to be less reliant on single passenger vehicles. If we do everything in every other sector, then carbon capture, and not that it has to come last chronologically, but only then do we shrink the problem enough that we can capture what remains and get to the net zero that we're aiming for. So absolutely, there shouldn't be a substitute for doing all those other things that we need to be doing across society.
Carbon capture is a tax on fossil. It's a tax on if you have to capture. It's a tax. It in fact reduces the attractiveness of fossil. No one thinks about it, but it means that fossil is more expensive. Right now, it's not the case because it's an incentive. But in the full play out globally, if you can't emit freely, the price of fossil goes up.
Yeah.
So anything that's based on fossil capture is a way of taxing fossil.
EPA is considering new source performance standards that would require
well,
carbon capture.
As we're not there
at fossil
today,
power
I wouldn't want to
plants.
defend today's policy achieving that, but if to get to where we need to get to, that's what it is. It's an additional cost, an energy that fossil make fossil clean up, so that's not using the atmosphere, make it clean. So that makes fossil more expensive and the other things even more attractive.
So I saw a slide a couple weeks ago, a professor who was teaching on the energy and climate conundrum, because it is a conundrum. The world is going to need a whole lot more energy, and we got to find a way to do it, and we got to find a way to do it without the emissions. But what really struck me is he had this slide that showed the average access to energy of the average person in 6 or 8 countries around the world. And it was like this big, right? And then there was this big giant bar at the end. Do you know what that bar was? No, it was your refrigerator. Oh. No, and my point is, the average person struggling with energy poverty has access to less than a quarter of the amount of energy your refrigerator uses every single day. And a lot of us, myself included, have 2 refrigerators in the house. And so I know that it's not anything, and I agree 100% that it has to be across the board, systems, everything. But we all have to do a better job of understanding our own decision-making, our own impact, and taking action to reduce that. Because when I saw that, it struck me that, we need to, and it's every little thing that adds up, right? So we need to be thinking about how do we do every one of those little things, and then how do we continue to influence at all those other levels so that we can collectively meet all the goals we need to meet. So anyway, that sticks with me, that slide. I use it everywhere now, but I think it's a really great message about we sometimes forget how much energy and that we individually use, and there's a whole lot that we could be doing different about that too.
Yeah, we should go. You guys, I'm sorry. I'm really tired. You guys can stay here, keep talking. No, thank you. Thank you, presenters. Thank you, audience. And run on down for the closing.